Aloha, everyone. Welcome. This is the Act 90 Working Group public hearing here on August 23rd. It was scheduled to start at 1 p.m. We're starting a little late due to technical issues. Apologize for that. Thank you for everyone's patience. The purpose of today's hearing of the Act 90 Working Group is to hear testimony from lessees. The usual guidelines are in order for the hearing today. I'd like to ask testifiers if they could keep their testimony to about 3 minutes or so, and there'll be lots of opportunity for questions and conversation after that. Keep yourself muted and your video off while you're waiting to testify, and then when you're POW testifying, you do the same. Chair Inouye and myself welcome everyone here, and our vice chairs, Keith Agaron and Bronco, are here from the legislature. If I could ask Chair Case, if I could ask Chair Case to introduce your team from DLNR, and then I'll ask the same of Deputy Director Atta. Please go ahead, Chair Case.
Yes, aloha, everyone. Good afternoon. Suzanne Case from the chair of DLNR. We have Bob Masuda, our first deputy. From Land Division, we have Russell Suji, Kevin Moore. I think we had Ian Hirakawa. I lost him. Maybe he's on the second page. And Gordon Height from the Hawaii Island. And then from Division of Forestry and Wildlife, we have David Smith. From Hawaii Island, we have Stephen Bergfeld, Jay Hatayama, and Ian Cole. Did I miss anybody? I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Case. Morris Atta, could you please introduce your team?
Yes, Deputy Morris Atta for Department of Agriculture. I have our senior property manager, Linda Murai, on this call as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that we've got Linda here. She knows everything about this. So
thank you.
Thank you for being here. Yes. Okay. So Co-Chair Inouye, did you want to have any comments before we get started with our lessee testimony?
Thanks, David. Thanks, Chair. Just want to, as earlier stated by Rep. Tarnas, is welcome everybody. I'm glad that this comes to a point where the testifiers will have their day. I'm thankful that they did their homework and we got lots of testifiers or testimonies that I understand only a few will actually give some oral testimonies as well. My committee clerk, Brad Knowlton, he has his own difficulties on, so he's watching us on YouTube. So like to welcome Brad as well. And thanks, Zoe, Chair Tarnas, your girl at the office, for submitting all the communication information. And good to see the rest of the working group, Deputy Director Morris Atta and Chair Case and Bob Masuda on as well, and the rest of the team. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Co-Chair. Appreciate that. So the purpose of the Act 90 Working Group is really to ascertain the process and the status of the transfer of these lands from DLNR to DOA pursuant to Act 90, and then to determine the challenges and potential remedies necessary to facilitate the process of fulfilling the purposes of Act 90. We've had one hearing already and one informational briefing where we got presentation from DLNR and DOA about the program, its status, its process. Today we're hearing from lessees. So we have numerous people here today to testify, and then we have other written testimony that was also provided. So I'll just go through and request that the testifiers provide their testimony to us. And then we can go to questions from the members. So first up, let me ask Brian Miyamoto with Hawaii Farm Bureau Federation. Is Brian on? If not.
I'm here, Chair.
Here you are, Brian. Okay, please go ahead. The
Thank
floor
you,
is
Chair. I'm
yours.
sorry. I thought we were going to let the lessees go, but we do appreciate you allowing the opportunity for the Hawaii Farm Bureau to testify. So good afternoon, Chair Tarnas, Chair Inouye, and members of the working group. First of all, the Hawaii Farm Bureau, we'd like to thank the legislature for establishing this working group to address, quite frankly, one of Hawaii Farm Bureau's top priorities. You do have our written testimony, so I know we only have a few minutes. So I'll just summarize and hit a couple of bullet points. With respect, here are some of our thoughts about what the working group can recommend in order to maintain the productive and publicly beneficial use of pasture lands by ag producers while ensuring that these lands are managed properly and adequately safeguarded. Again, this is one of the Farm Bureau's top priorities. We do believe it was the legislative intent of Act 90 to transfer these lands over to Department of Agriculture. And nothing has changed to make food production more or less important, sorry. If anything, food self-security, sufficiency, food security is even more critical today. Because of Department of Ag's more flexible and appropriate lease terms and retention policies, and their understanding of agriculture and what it takes to produce food in Hawaii, we believe the Department of Agriculture is the correct agency to oversee the management of these lands. Department of Ag's mission includes fostering ag production and leasing its lands accordingly, not auctioning them for the most lucrative lease rents. Secondly, Department of Land and Natural Resources legitimate concerns about conservation, stewardship, access, future reforestation, and ensuring that the land is managed properly can be addressed as conditions of Department of Agricultural leases. Those types of terms are not incompatible with the mission of Department of Agriculture. On the flip side, ensuring that ag producers are supported and benefited is not part of the mission of DLNR. Therefore, the proposal to modify, expand the laws that DLNR operate under and the associated regulations in an attempt to accommodate agriculture when it's clearly not part of DLNR's charge or its priorities is unjustifiable. Frankly, it's just not a good fit. Again, our position has been and always will be, DOA is the right agency to manage these agricultural leases. Farm Bureau will be available for questions. Chair, I did want to give the lessees the opportunity to share their stories. Just one more point, if I could make, Chair, that's not in our testimony. You know, while we understand that DLNR wants to keep certain lands because of the potential for reforestation, habitat reforestation, and other purposes, you know, our ranchers are currently actively producing agriculture on these lands. Transferring the ag lands to DOA will help DLNR in their mission so they can focus more efforts towards lands that are already in conservation while the rancher and farmers steward the land they are producing on. Again, our position is we believe DOA is the correct agency and the appropriate agency to manage these leases. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. We're hearing from the two organizations first, the Farm Bureau and then the Cattlemen's Council, then we'll go to the individual lessees. Next, I'd like to ask Nicole Galassi with the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator Inouye, Representative Tarnas, Representative Bronco, Senator Keith Agaran. Again, I'd like to thank you guys for creating this working group. I know that lots of hours has gone into it, and we recognize the time that you're taking to work on this issue. It is a really important one. There are ranchers who are not available to testify today. Understandably, while this will all remain civil, it's difficult not to be afraid of retribution for speaking out, especially when it's your lease at stake. So the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council is here testifying on behalf of the industry to advocate for the support of leases being transferred. Our written testimony was submitted to the working group, but I'd like to highlight some certain things, mostly that food production is still an extremely important goal for Hawaii. We hope that this working group can recognize that lands in active production should be protected and stay in agricultural production. The best way to do that is to transfer the leases to the Department of Agriculture, who is the appropriate agency to manage these leases. Despite multi-use on certain leases, we should be prioritizing agriculture. There is almost 2 million acres in the state in conservation, according to the Land Use Division. These are the areas we should be looking at for reforestation and for clearing of invasive species. On the other hand, the number of acres in pasture has been declining steadily over the past couple of decades. The things that would help keep these acres in active production, that would be leases based on agricultural terms, confidence in leases so that it would encourage investment in infrastructure, and protection from being converted to other uses, which is what they would get under the Department of Agriculture. These ranches need to be economically sustainable to be contributing both to food production and to environmental conservation. When the ranchers are economically sustainable, that's when the capital is available to implement these conservation practices that the state might not have resources or manpower to implement. We hope that we can amplify the conversation about ranchers as stewards of the land and well-managed rangelands as an actual option for addressing climate change while feeding the community. Ranchers are always seeking to improve and diversify, but they want to improve upon this sector, this endeavor that they're in. Grass farmers caring for livestock, providing a high quality protein. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. So we have written testimony from both Hawaii Farm Bureau and Hawaii Cattlemen's Council that was distributed. Next, we're going to hear from Alan Gottlieb with Ponoholo Ranch. Alan also sent in written testimony, but he's here to provide oral testimony as well. Please, the floor is yours, Alan.
Thank you so much. Chair Tarnas and Chair Inouye, co-chairs, members of the working committee. Ponoholo Ranch Limited operates its cattle ranch on Hawaii Island on over 10,000 acres of land. Some fee simple, some leased. Some of the leased lands have been with the state of Hawaii. In fact, we have had leases with the state of Hawaii managed by DLNR since our inception in 1979. Two of the leases we have held in recent years have been long-term, and one was a revocable permit on a month-to-month basis for over 40 years. In 2002, when one of our DLNR leases we previously held for many years came up for renewal, it was required to be put out for auction. At auction, someone else bid up the price, and to keep this lease, which had become an integral part of our operation and upon which we had invested many dollars on improvements, we won the auction by paying about 7 times the economic value of land, in essence, buying back our own improvements. As our 20-year leases with DLNR were coming to an end in the early 2020s, we spent very little money investing in improvements on these DLNR lands. It made no economic sense for us to invest money in the last 10 years of the lease, only to have to buy back our own improvements at auction. We were fortunate when in early 2018, former HDOA Chair Scott Enright worked with DLNR to attempt to get many of the pasture leases transferred to HDOA, supporting the legislative intent of Act 90. After a meeting, DLNR agreed to use Ponoholo as a test case for transfer of pasture lands from DLNR to HDOA. Ponoholo's 2 long-term leases and 1 revocable permit were eventually transferred to HDOA in late 2020. And HDOA and Ponoholo were able to negotiate lease extensions for the 2 long-term leases, and HDOA was even able to issue a long-term lease for the revocable permit we had held at DLNR on a month-to-month basis for over 40 years. With a long-term lease in place, instead of a month-to-month tenure, we were finally able to make improvements on that piece. Under DLNR, Ponoholo Ranch has always been an active cooperator with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, watershed partnerships, and in fact have won many awards and community support for our stewardship. We have allowed public access for hunting. Furthermore, Ponoholo has practiced intensive grazing on all its lands for over 40 years, a practice which has been coming into favor with many land stewards for its very positive carbon sequestration from improved grasslands. We take our kuleana seriously. To think that any rancher would change any of their stewardship for the land if it were transferred out of DLNR to HDOA is ludicrous. Having lease terms that support investment in the land and increase productivity of the cattle makes sense and for production and environmental sustainability. Some argue, why should we support export crops? Many of our calves are exported to the mainland for feeding and slaughter. Ponoholo and other ranchers do keep some cattle here for local markets, but there is simply not enough infrastructure to keep more cattle here at the present time. And what would we do in times of drought like we have faced for the last 2 years? And we're certain to face more of in the future with climate change. Regardless, no matter what percentage of calves are able to stay here and be finished and consumed in Hawaii, cattle ranching provides more ecosystem services than vacant land, non-native brush, or even DLNR managed lands do. With better lease terms and management by H2OA, which prioritizes agriculture, ranchers will be better equipped to continue these ecosystem services, which benefits everyone in Hawaii, whether they know it or not, and invest in their pastures to keep more cattle in Hawaii. There is no loss for the community if ranchers succeed. It is not the environment versus food production. It is truly a win-win, a win for productivity and a win for the environment. Ranchers do every day what the state does not have the manpower or budget to do. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it. Next, we have Jason Moniz signed up to testify. Is Jason or Jerry, are they here?
Jason here.
Jason, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Jason Moniz with KK Ranch.
Thank you all for the opportunity to testify before the Act 90 Working Group. I'm testifying on my behalf and my wife, Jerry Moniz, KK Ranch, Inc. In 1832, Kamehameha III brought over from California, which was then Mexico, 3 celebrated Mexican-Spanish vaqueros to work the ranges and teach Hawaiians to become more efficient in handling cattle and horses. The vaqueros started working out of Hanai Poi on the slopes of Mauna Kea. Hanai Poi, General Lease 447, almost 200 years later, continues to be part of the Hawaii beef cattle industry. 99% of what was originally a 7,200 acre pastoral lease is today 5,100 acres of 22 different species of pastoral grasses that is harvested by beef cattle to produce a high quality protein food. Until Hawaii's feedlots closed in the early 1900s, 100% of the production was harvested and marketed in the state. Today, 100% of our cows and bulls and a growing number of our heifers and steers enter the local market. Jerry has worked religiously over the past 15 years, first assisting with and then chairing the Taste of Hawaii range, promoting the local marketing of local beef and other agricultural products. Many local chefs and culinary students have participated over the years, learning to utilize local beef and other agricultural products. During the COVID pandemic, we realized people were without work and needed food. Hawaii's beef cattle were a very liquid source of food. Our slaughter plants remained open and increased throughput to keep product on our store shelves, and thousands of pounds were then donated through the Hawaii Farm Bureau, NGOs, and other charities to reach local families. Jerry again went to work as chair of the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council Marketing Committee to seek and coordinate beef donations statewide. Hawaii's beef industry works continuously to expand local markets. It's insulting and puts us on a fight to hear criticism that Hawaii beef cattle producers are not contributing to the efforts to make Hawaii sustainable in food production. We personally advocated for the support and supported Act 90 back in the early 2000s due to our experiences as lessees, and particularly with the withdrawal of 2,100 acres, 1/3 of all lease, to mitigate the realignment and of the former saddle road through Palila critical habitat near the Palakaloa training area. That taking occurred without fair compensation and nearly bankrupted us, if not for flexibility afforded us by our creditors, the late Mr. Richard Toledo and Mr. David DeLuz. DLNR regulations were in place. The DLNR regulations that were in place failed to provide for fair compensation for withdrawals from pastoral leases. DLNR fought most efforts to amend their regulations to prevent similar future impacts from withdrawals. Throughout the withdrawal process, it was clear to us that DLNR's mission was not aligned to support agriculture entities, and it was clearly not their priority to make changes to be more supportive. After 10 years and $15 million failed to reestablish a political population on the north slope of Mauna Kea on the withdrawal lands, the mitigation efforts were abandoned. Despite this, DLNR chose not to return the land to pastoral use, but instead held them for other conservation purposes, again demonstrating to us their priorities were not aligned with agriculture. Recent efforts by DLNR to acquire lease authority similar to HDOA could potentially be helpful, but lessees are skeptical of DLNR's intents, including allowing the leases to remain in pastoral use and have therefore not been supportive. All that being said, prior to the COVID outbreak, Jerry was introduced to Bob Matsuda, and the three of us began to have dialogue over Act 90. Unfortunately, COVID and contentious legislation separated us. Within the past month, we reconnected with Bob and offered again to use our lease as a trial or experiment to see if we could come to a workable agreement while remaining under the management of DLNR. I also asked Bob to think outside the box because I still think HDOA would be a better fit. However, we are committed to see this through. Bob and we believe that what DLNR and we as pastoral lessees want to accomplish are not that far apart. We all agree that we need to move quickly to see this through. And my hope is we are successful and other lessees may view it as a way forward. To be very transparent, and I hope it doesn't put Bob in a bad spot, we agreed to the following. During this process, Jerry and I will stop campaigning to move our lease from DLNR to HDOA. For the process to move forward, we also told Bob we needed assurance from DLNR that pastoral leases would not be taken out of cattle production going forward. Granted, that is not specifically defined, but our expectations would be the net overall outcome is no net loss in economic production. Hopefully, it is not a surprise to anyone on this committee that the ranch is our business, and it is that important second or sometimes third job required for people to survive in Hawaii. To go into more detail would take too much time, but I do request that you make time to come to the ranch where a picture is worth 1,000 words. Thank you again for your time and effort you're putting into this.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Please give my best to Jerry. Thank you for your testimony. Next, Brendan Balthazar, Diamond B Ranch on Maui. Sir, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours. Please unmute yourself and provide us your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Giving on Portuguese 3 minutes for talk is worse than coming home after your wife and cook all day and say, you're not hungry.
I'm sorry, brother. Give it a try. I'm a patient guy.
Anyway, I don't normally write things down, but I was told that I keep forgetting some important facts. Anyway, I started Diamond B Ranch in 1968. I acquired DLNR lease in Kapopala. I have it about a little over 20 years, and that's when I first met Morris. But that property was just vacant. I put in wells, pipelines, fences to the tune of about $300,000, which incidentally, I just got done paying back about 2 years ago. I acquired another property about 15 years ago, which has now been put on the DLNR. I got them about 15 years ago, spent just under $400,000 improving it. Fences, road, electricity for pumps. We put in 4 miles of 2-inch pipe up to the mountain, tanks, water to the top, tractor work, roads, everything. Yes, hard work, but not very profitable, but it's a lifestyle. Most ranches will tell you it's a damn lifestyle. The state informed me about 2 weeks ago that they will be taking 2,100 acres out of my 3,400 acre lease, excuse me, to put in forestry. One of the proposals forestry made to the state was tree sequester carbon. Well, I started from CTAR UH, says that pasture sequester as much carbon and as efficiently as forest. especially with minimized disturbance. The state wants to increase food production, which we all talking about. That can't happen when productive farm and ranch lands are taken away from those who really care for the ranch and who really care for the land. We not only pay a lease to the state, we spend more on maintenance of the land than we pay on the leases a lot of times. When I first got the lease, there was a lot of fireweed on that property. There were areas 3 to 4 acres of fireweed. Now, if you go up there, which I invite any of you to come, like Jason did, you see a plant here and there. We spend a lot on controlling them. Forestry takes money from the state, but pays nothing back. Ranchers plant trees and keep patches of trees for shade and moisture. Over 40% of lands is under forestry. At least here on Maui, I cannot speak for the other islands, but at least here on Maui, forestry does a very poor job of maintaining the forest. Right next to that property up in Kula, the 3,400 acres, is a few thousand acres of Kula forest. Most of it with invasive trees, fireweed, thorn bushes, blackberry, and banana polka. There were jeep roads throughout that area. When I was a kid, it was mostly open because it was ranch. And when it's taken away to forestry, a lot of wattle trees and stuff was grown. And now the narrow trails, a lot of them can't even be walked on. I'm told by the forestry division here that they don't have the resources to take care of the area. They don't have the money or the manpower, yet they want to take more land. Kind of like filling your plate with food after you're done eating and you're full. So let's go get some more to waste. I propose that in my condition here, I am proposing that the top section of that property, which is more conducive to planting ohia trees, sandalwood trees, and core trees, the top area, which is what they refer to as the alpine area, would be about 2,000 acres. I have no problem compromising and having them take that. I developed the lower portion, again, taking a water tank all the way up there so cattle can move up there during the summer months to graze. I also have done a lot with the Kaupo lease. It's a very dry area, but I was already told that when the lease expired, that they would not be renewed. It would go under to forestry. You know, ranchers are grass farmers. You know, they always say ranchers and farmers, but we raise grass. And the better job we do raising grass, and we use the animals to harvest this grass, we take care of the land like it's our own. It's our livelihood and our passion. Any land that goes to DOA is still owned by the state. It'll be kept as open land by the ranchers and can always go in another use in the future. But once it's under DLNR and forestry, full of trees and invasive plants, it'll be hard and costly to reclaim that open space back. The average age of most of the ranchers is in their 60s now because the young kids can't afford it. They can't go and do it. I urge all of you to not take more food producing land and put it full of trees. The Department of Ag really understands ag. DLNR does not. Increasing leases, because every so often with my Kaupo lease, I have to come off for reevaluation. And they raise my lease at the time when it's a drought and cattle prices are in the toilet. I don't think Department of Ag would do that. And when leases are up, like Alan referred to, you have to bid against people who never put 1 cent on that property. And you have to bid against them to get your land back. Actually, you're paying for all of the improvements that you put on the property. You know, Article 11 of the state constitution basically says the state shall conserve, protect agricultural land, promote diversified agriculture, and increase agricultural self-sufficiency and assume availability of agricultural suitable lands. It's in our Constitution. So I really appreciate, again, all of you guys being on that committee. I thank Lorraine for having the decency to reply whenever I send stuff, and Patrick, and most of you guys. Hopefully you can see the light through the forest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balthazar. Appreciate your testimony and your communication all last session as well. Next, we have Lonnie Petrie. Lonnie from Kapopala Ranch. If I could ask you to give your testimony, the floor is yours, Lonnie. Please proceed.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, chairs, co-chairs, and members of the working group. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Lonnie Petrie. My husband, Bill, and I operate Kapopala Ranch, which was established with a lease issued by Kamehameha IV in 1860. Today, the ranch is comprised of GL 5374, approximately 22,000 acres, and expires in 8 years. We also have 2 revocable permits, which collectively are approximately 12,000 acres that could expire anytime. Act 90 is not a bill about transferring lands. It's a bill about implementing sound resource management. The DLNR does not have the framework to ensure perpetuity in managing very important and environmentally fragile infrastructure. Example, when we moved to Kapopala in 1977, there was no fence to keep the cattle out of the forest reserves. Hawaiian Ranch's lease had expired in 1972, and surely they quit repairing the boundary fence many years before that. There were hundreds, if not over 1,000 head of cattle in the Ka'u and Kapopala forest reserves. The public auction process disincentivizes a lessee from taking care of the infrastructure. A boundary fence with a conservation zoned area is a critical piece of environmental infrastructure. The water system was also a shambles in 1977. Again, there was no incentive for the previous ranch to repair anything if they stood a chance of losing it at public auction. Today, with only 8 years left on our lease, we have nearly 10 million gallons of water stored and 2 separate reliable water resources that deliver water through 110 miles of fully functioning pipeline. The ranch's water system has been used 2 times now for fighting wildfire in the adjacent areas, the Kapopala Forest Reserve and the Volcanoes National Park. We also have just completed a 7-mile overhaul of boundary fence with the Kapopala Forest Reserve. Why? Why do we do this? We do this because we believe that there will be lease reform. If transferring land to a sister agency is unpalatable to the DLNR, then the Act 90 working group should attempt to solve this dilemma by reaching out to other organizations that have a history of successes. There are organizations that could possibly assist in forging meaningful relationships with mutual benefit to manage our resources. 2 of which I have some knowledge are Holistic Management International and Stanford's Natural Capital Project. I have links in my written testimony to both of those. We testify today in hopes that this working group can find long-term, meaningful solutions to best managing our resources. Before we can talk about collaborative resource management, the state has to acknowledge that ranching is an industry that they want on its land. After viewing the Climate for Change documentary aired on Hawaii News Now, which was in part funded by the state, it's hard for me to see any future here with such a biased and adversarial stance against our industry. Should the DLNR and state policymakers see ranching as an industry capable of contributing to food sustainability and positively impacting our ecology and economy in a socially acceptable way, then we can talk about the future of ranchers' stake in managing state resource. Several ranches have already had their leases transferred from DLNR to DOA. Therefore, in all fairness to the rest of lessees, the DLNR needs to find solutions to multifaceted resource management for the ranches on parcels of which the DLNR has great interests, like Kapopala. Through 44 years here, my family has already displayed an ability to work with DOFA in a context of can do. In the past, we've always been advocates for responsible resource management. For decades, we've collaborated with DOFA's Forestry Division. In the late 80s, we advocated setting aside the co-management area. By 1990, in cooperation with DOFA's Wildlife Division, we set up a mechanism for public bird hunting. We have a commitment to the public and have accepted the responsibility for maintaining the public's access to the forest reserves. My father, the Kapopala Co-Management Area. My father, Gordon Cran, and then State DOFA Administrator Liebert Landgraf were enthusiastically planning the co-management area in the late 1980s. The 1,250 acres was the most pristine native forest the ranch had to offer. DOFA needed an area zoned agriculture in order to implement the project. All of the outlying area could be ideal for the plan were zone conservation and could not be harvested nor cultivated. This was truly exciting for both parties, and the process of extracting the acreage and the cattle commenced with high hopes for a bright future for coal hardwood products. Once the area was withdrawn, the ranch had little to do with the project. Our job was to keep the cattle out, which was no small task with an uncontrolled 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week public access to the area. After a decade or more, the area was repurposed and renamed the Kapopala Canoe Area. Let me talk about Kapopala Cooperative Game Management Area. Cran, my dad, in conjunction with then DOFA's wildlife biologist Ron Bachman, forged new partnerships and ventured into the Kapopala Cooperative Game Management Area in 1989. The ranch was open, as it is today, 3 months a year to fulfill some of the public's recreational purposes. Wildlife Division worked closely with the ranch in developing much needed water resources because at that time, the ranch was still under a revocable permit and large capital outlays couldn't be financed or amortized with land with no term. Cran and Bachman built the first line reservoir the ranch ever had. Water storage was confined to redwood water tanks prior to, only averaging 5,000 to 10,000 gallon capacity. This cooperative effort yielded a reservoir of 400,000 gallon capacity and the first sigh of relief that the ranch had a backup water supply of about 3 months' supply. This cooperation went on and improvements continued with building several cement water troughs to replace dysfunctional metal ones that were rusty and leaking water. Several water lines were installed jointly. Needless to say, the ranch and DOFA had a very good working relationship. For several years, we even helped survey the Nene movement by reading tag numbers. The Ka'u and Kapopala Forest Reserves. Our belief that the public has a right to access public areas resonates in the past 44 years of our commitment to providing daily access to the Ka'u and Kapopala Forest Reserves. Years ago, it meant giving out a key once or maybe twice a month, whereas today it involves hiring an answering service to field over 300 calls a month and providing 600 plus registered users with personal identification numbers. The Kapopala Ranch website has an up-to-date information necessary to easily navigate access to the reserves. In summary, complex issues take a greater effort to find viable solutions. Keeping an honest and open mind is the only way to make progress. And thank you for our opportunity to testify.
Thank you for taking the time to do that, and give my best to Bill. I appreciate all the work from Kapopala over the years. Next, we have Peter Simmons. Peter, are you able to join us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we hear you, so please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And I must say, I've been amazed and kind of riveted by the testimony that we've heard so far. I know many of the people that are testifying, and it saddens me that that's been the case for so long. When I was getting ready to testify today in my preparation, I went back and reread the DLNR DOFA's very well written forest action plan. My reaction was mixed between true admiration that it was so well written and that they were by such knowledgeable people, and that they had such depth and such a wide range of issues facing our forests and natural resources. But I was really saddened because once again, I had to read how horribly underfunded DOFA in particular is. And it's been the case for so long. And I guess reading it in the Forest Action Plan itself saddened me. It states in the Forest Action Plan that Hawaii's 48th in state spending in terms of forests, state forests, 48th. Well, we're a small state, maybe that's part of it. But we're 11th in terms of the size of the state forest reserves. So we're almost at the bottom in funding, and yet we're in the top tier in terms of responsibility that we've given DOFA in particular. I further read, which made me depressed, that we're not even close to parity if you looked at our endangered species and native birds in particular, in terms of federal budgets. So, you know, we have, I don't know, 2/3 of the endangered birds in the United States. And I was reading from this Forest Action Plan that it would take about $83 million a year to secure our native birds. And that's about half of DOFA's budget, I think, is what I read. State Parks notes insufficiency of funding. And we're all in this together. I mean, I hear from the ranchers and I know them, and I know from the foresters and their passion and depth of feeling, and you folks as the legislators feel the same way. But we've done ourselves a big disservice. In terms of commercial forestry, we've kind of neglected that too, underfunded, undermanaged. We don't even want to do an inventory of our assets, probably because we don't have the money to do it. So the Forest Action Plan it discusses the threat, one of the major threats to the mesic montane forest of converting these lands to pastoral use. The plan is mute on converting tens of thousands of those acres of existing parkland pasture into native forest ecosystems. And underlying the question of Act 90, which has been brought up here already, is, okay, we know that we've underfunded our Division of Forestry and Wildlife. We know that many of our resources that they are responsible for are not in good shape. And yet we want to give them more responsibility, and they want to take more responsibility at the same time. They have really good people working for DOFA. They're really dedicated, we all know that. But I think this is just misguided, trying to take on too much and not do enough with what you're already responsible for. And that's not even including, and it's written into their plan, the conflicting mandates that they have in addition to the underfunding or unfunded mandates. Okay, so we're one state. These are state lands. The best, from my experience, that we can do for lands that are not top tier conservation assets is to have them managed by people who know what they're doing on the land. And as has already been testified to, these are the ranchers and the people that work with the ranchers that know the lands, that have been managing lands for years and years. And the number one biggest benefit to the land itself, I think, in terms of actual improvements, is making our ranchers more successful in every way. And rather than loading up the ranchers with responsibilities like taking care of all of the requests to go on to the state's lands, we need to find ways to make them more profitable so that they can do more for what they're really good at, taking care of the land. And if we really want to have action on those lands, we will find incentives for our lessees to do some of the conservation stewardship that we'd all love to see happen. I had the great privilege, some of you know, to work for Kamehameha Schools, and I only had one department to manage ranches and conservation assets. And so I didn't have a fight about which file folder I was going to put the asset in. It was all Kamehameha's assets. They're all state assets. We take the time, like Lonnie was suggesting, and really buckling down and knowing these lands, what they want, what can be done, what's practical, how to incentivize it, and write it up in a lease that's agreed to and give the term necessary to make it successful. Really? That would be huge. And it should go into Department of Agriculture because that's where these lands, the economic driver is with the cattle rancher. And I mean economic driver, not only in terms of leases paid, but the whole ecosystem of ranching on the land. So I'm delighted that you guys legislature is taking it seriously. There are some real opportunities here in this rub. But I got to go back and say, most of us know that the Division of Forestry and Wildlife has been forced to not manage large areas of our lands. They're overrun with weeds. It's too expensive. There's not enough bang for the buck. Probably wouldn't get a matching grant from the feds. So what's the responsible thing to do? Is to put it in the hands of the people that know the lands and that can manage them best and incentivize them to be successful. So thanks for the opportunity. I'm very smart people here. I'm sure we could, if you decide to make a difference can be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that very much. The last person we have signed up is Kimo Guzman or Christy Kajiwara Guzman. Are they on Zoom? I don't see them. Okay, the other folks who sent in written testimony, which we've distributed to the working group who have not already spoken, Warren Watanabe with the Maui County Farm Bureau, Allison Nakama with Local Food Coalition, Micah Munikata with Ulu Pono Initiative, Jacob Tavares with Parker Ranch, Stephen DeLuz with Pu'uwa'awa Cattle Company, Jody DeLuz, and then also from the Maui Cattlemen's Association. Are there any other testifiers on our Zoom call here today that would like to give testimony? It hasn't already done so. Seeing none, I want to thank the testifiers for their very compelling testimony. And I'd like to turn to the working group members for questions. If I turn to you first, Co-Chair Inouye, Senator, please, if you have questions, please proceed.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I do. Brandon, are you still on from Maui? Brandon, you have to unmute yourself. Oh, okay.
That's a hard thing for mute is on top.
We're fine. Hopefully that, I hope we don't get flooded out, but I think rains are a good sign for our state anyway.
It is.
A question. You mentioned in your testimony regarding a discussion you had on an offer of the land for forestry to DLNA or DOFAR. Is it a portion of it, is it an unleased portion that you recommend they do forestry, or is it part of your lease that you want to send back to them?
Well, actually, it's part of my lease. The whole lease, I leased the whole 3,400 acres. But when this whole thing came up about taking it all into forestry, it's really saddened me. And I said, you know, I've gotten water up to about the 7,500 foot level, and cattle can graze up there. But from there up, I have not. And that area there, which forestry refers to as alpine area, I have no problem with them taking from there up to the Halakla National Park, which is almost 2/3 of the property, you know. It's
And how many acres is that would be about?
1,900 to 2,000 acres.
Okay. And what was the reaction from DOFAR?
Well, the local reaction from the people I've been working with here, it's, no, it's too late. It's already going to be forestry, and we are going to plant trees starting up there, and we're going to plant all the way down to the road. And I said, well, why not start in that alpine area? You know, it's more conducive to those sandalwood trees and stuff that grows way up high. And I was told, and this is verbatim, and they can come see me. I was told it's much easier to plant trees in the pasture where we can walk than trying to run around up there in the bushes. So I said, okay, that's the reason why you want to take the pasture. So I'm just saying compromise, put the portion that is already in cattle and productive land on the Department of Ag, and the top portion, which is, like I said, about 1,900 acres, I have no problem with that going to forestry.
Okay, so another question then, if the area under consideration by DOFAR going all the way down, what's the total then they would take out of your lease?
100%.
And that's in the Kaupo area?
No, that's in the Kula area.
Oh, that's the other second lease you have?
Yeah. Well, the Kaupo area, Lorraine, is, I was told already, I still have some time left on my lease, but I was told it's not going to be renewed, not going to come up for auction, because they're going to make a dryland forest. Ironically, what is really funny is on both locations, there's no water, right? And I dug the well and I got the water up there, and I was asked by forestry, would you mind leaving the pipes and the tanks up there so we could use? And I said, so well, we'll pay you something for it. But you know, the whole point is, once you lose that land, it's gone. It is really gone. So the bottom portion that we manage, we have spent honestly more money than what we can make on the property, trying to keep the invasive species out. And as Peter was saying, I really liked his testimony. Like Peter said, you know, and I understand forestry is really under stress because they're understaffed, underfunded. So why give them more land that they're going to have to mismanage again? This is the initial, so they'll go plant a few bunch of trees. And then as I went to that place where I was hoping you'd come and see, and Gil went to right next, the Kula Forest, it's just thick with wattle trees and invasive stuff. So if you cannot manage what you already have, why take more? Let us manage it until you can manage it, you know? That's why I said, I don't mind it going into the bottom section, going into Department of Ag, because in the future, it can always go to someplace else.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Peter, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. With the fires in my district in Waimea recently at Puku, it's very disturbing, and we all know that we're into this climate change, upon us as well. Now, I do know that with Kapopala Ranch, and I'm not sure if Honoholo has been one of those that have contributed to, fire suppression, their own system. With regards to Kamehameha schools now, as far as I'm concerned, most of you know me, I'm the old timer. I was here, I know very good friends of Lonnie's parents. So that's how dated I am. Very familiar with the activity there. Very familiar with the forestation project you guys did up on Kamehameha schools by the volcano area. You guys have done a really good job. Now, having said that, I just wanted to hear, because of the concerns I really have about where we stand with our fires that's occurring, taking away part of the grazing lands, kind of like brings us back to home. That's the kind of decisions we have to make for the future. So, and I understand that all of you who are in the industry have taken good care of your lands. And also you're part of a frontline persons. If there's a fire, like what Lonnie folks went through with the national park fires, I mean, they were the good neighbor, but they were the good neighbor because they worked 24 hours to fight the fire. The national park system worked until the 8 hours and they went back home. Very disturbing. And no different from any part of a grazing lands in the state. So having said that, when you, wouldn't it be better? And I agree, many of you have spoken that we have so much conservation lands up Mauka regions in parts of our state. Continue to do the forestry on the upper lands. Makes sense, right? But then again, we're back into to hear about all the unfunded mandate that the legislature has not given to DOFA, to assist and make sure that forestry survives. So how did Kamehameha schools decide, and I know they got lots of land, aside from, as an example, the Big Island, between the state lands and Kamehameha, most of the lands that they own are on my island, right?
That's correct.
When you made decisions to look at forestry, did you take into consideration you could have done forestry on the lower lands, lower availability? Because I'm familiar with the volcano area. I own a cottage up at the old Golf Links Road. I still do. We have the property since the 80s and we love it. So I see all the activity going on. So on your working with Kamehameha and dealing with where you're gonna increase your forestry?
There's a couple of things, Lorraine. I've been retired for
I know.
a while, so
that's why we're happy. Well, we're happy that you're here. You're one of our sources. I would call you anyway.
I can suggest a couple of things that are different. One is that the lessees that decided not to continue ranching on a portion of the lands that their families had formerly ranched. So, for instance,
that had a lease with you guys?
When I was with Kamehameha, there was a transition where For instance, W.H. Greenwell decided that they didn't want to lease 62,700 acres of really remote, rough, relatively unproductive pasture land that they had to take in order to have the lease. Same thing with Sherwood Greenwell. He didn't want to continue with his lease above his own fee simple land. So I think there was a bit of contraction back in the 80s where people were consolidating onto their family fee simple land. And it was
You're talking about Kilakekua area, yeah? The Greenwells?
yeah, Kealakekua, and if it were Dillingham over at Keauhou, none of the lessees were wanting to stay. And so the biggest issue that we faced was repurposing those lands to keep them productive in some fashion and keep taxes being paid and have insurance and so forth. And so, for instance, the lands above Honaunau Forest are a license to a hunting club with 60 families. 60 families formed a hunting club. A lot of the ranch activities, I actually did a little chart the other day, but there, when Kamehameha bought the sugar company out of bankruptcy, we put ranching on about a third of the land that was purchased. So about 5,500 acres of land, but in former sugar land. And I believe that the amount of cattle that were removed from the leases on Kamehameha land was probably around 2,800 animal units a year. And I believe that the capacity of that sugar land, low elevation, right on, some of the best growing land that we had, right near the slaughterhouse, was more like 3,800. So it was actually a net increase, if you will. But I think that planning was number one. We started planning for the eventuality of doing conservation resource management years before the leases were taken back and had the funds to do it. I mean, it was a risk because you don't always know what you're going to run into, but Keauhou Ranch is being all about conservation, stewardship, and education. That fits that mission for the Kamehameha family. So, but when we had, when you have neighbors that are leasing land from the state only, they're more vulnerable. Because especially the way the state has been in the past with these month-to-month agreements, and Kamehameha had month-to-month agreements too. It's not about who's got them and all that, but that's not a way to encourage anything. That's a very difficult situation. And so the state side leases got more run down because people couldn't trust the future. And so that's the state we're in. And I kind of disagree with the state. And I just have to say this. If we look at the lands that lay above sugar, where sugar was, those lands are often in forest resource. Those are state forest resources or state reserves, rather, like the Gila Forest Reserve out that way. But also on the private side, those are conservation R resource. It's an enormous amount. I'm going to say over 330,000 acres of conservation R, and the legislature set those lands apart, conservation R, for recreation and forest and commercial forestry. Those were looked at as productive in the sense of productive, directly productive economically for the communities, as well as the conservation assets that they had. That's why they were there. They were to be conserved in perpetuity for commercial forestry and for recreation. Well, the state, those lands are very, very, very expensive to turn around. They're loaded with strawberry guava. They're very difficult lands. And for sure, it's a lot cheaper to go out in the pasture and and walk through it, planting trees, and feel like you've done and have done a good job. There's nothing. I have nothing bad to say about it. It's just a question of priorities and practicality. And so the vision that I read in the DOFA plan is what made it so sad to understand the reality. The visions and the intentions of the staff that wrote that, I thought were really on the mark. And I had some issues, but mostly it was really, really high-minded stuff. The question is, how are we going to pay for it? And I don't think we're going to pay for it by taking land out of ranchers. And there's so many examples of standing on a rancher's land, looking across at the forest of the state-owned land, and just knowing that it's a shame. It's just a shame.
Thanks, Peter. David, can we call DOA? Is
Yeah. Deputy
Morris-
Director Morris Atta is here, and certainly he's a member of the working group, and so certainly have some conversation. Senator Inouye, did you need to ask Deputy Morris Atta a question?
Right. Okay.
Go ahead.
Is he around?
Yes, he's here.
Come on.
Okay. Hi, Morris.
Hi.
You know what? I think the working group would probably like, and this is not for today, you know, all the transfers, and thank you to staff as well for giving us all the TMKs and the properties transferred as well. Can you, from that list, can you give the committee, and you can send it to the chairs, those leased lands that were transferred that are in cattle grazing?
Got it.
I think you got mixed, yeah? The transfer lands probably are existing ag activity, agriculture, different from cattle, yeah?
Yes, it's a mix.
Yeah, okay. So whatever the document number, what islands they belong to, and how many are in cattle grazing.
Got it.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think for now, that's it for me.
Thank you, Chair Inouye. I wanted to say that I've asked Department of Agriculture and Department of Land and Natural Resources to work together to pull together all this information into one document from both the agencies. And as soon as that is prepared, we'll circulate it with the working group. So they're working on it now. And I appreciate Morris and Suzanne for your work on that.
Yeah, that's good. So when he sends it to us, then we can distribute to the
Yes.
other members of the working
Yes,
group.
we will.
Okay.
We turn to other working group members. Vice Chair Bronco, did you have any questions you want to ask? Please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you. This is for Ms. Petrie from Kapopala Ranch. I wanted to ask if you could share with the committee just the situation, the stresses of being on 2 revocable permits that you had mentioned in your testimony.
The stresses, well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I, okay.
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead, please.
Well, I can't, I guess we're, looking at the revocable permits, you have to look at where's the risk. Is the risk in growing eucalyptus trees by an international company like it was 20 years ago? No. I think the tree guys have gone away, at least at these elevations. The neighbor ranchers, always a threat. And yet, where's the water? Fortunately for a lot of our, for Kapopala, the sugar company owned the ranch. The ranch and the sugar company were one. So when the sugar company went out, it was just a case of putting the water pipes kind of back together. The geographical elevation changes were meant for water to flow a certain way. I'm not saying that somebody can't go build a reservoir, but yeah, it is risky. The DLNR holds all the cards. If they wanted to, they sure could put these lands up to public auction, or, if all of a sudden, Huhonua said, we want these lands put up to public auction, they certainly could, I believe. So yes, very unnerving. We try very hard to do everything that's needed from a social standpoint in our community to provide hunting access, to be good neighbors, because we certainly are teetering on anybody getting ticked off and kicking the bucket. I don't, if that answers your question, Patrick, but these revocable permits, you have to remember my mom and dad came here and operated a really run-down lease. It wasn't a lease, it was a revocable permit for 17 years. And it's a risk you take. It's certainly no way to incentivize people to do better. And that's, I think that's one of the things that we talk about assets. I think the human asset is one of the things that's kind of overlooked with ranchers. We're pretty easy to find. We're always working, and we're always determined and pushing forward to make things better. And I think from the human resource, I know I'm getting sideways from your question, Patrick, but I think there's a very valuable human resource in the ranching community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. That's it.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Back to you, Co-Chair Inouye.
All right. First, if there's anybody else from the working group to ask a question, then
Thank you. Yeah, that's that courteous of you to offer that. Deputy Atta or Chair Case, do you have questions of our testifiers? Now's a good time. Go ahead, please, Mr. Atta.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that, no, I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Chair Case or Deputy Masuda? Go ahead, Chair Case.
Thank you. No questions right now. Thank you.
Okay, all right, just wanted, so then let's circle back to you, Senator Inouye.
okay, DLNR, within the last, let's use 10 years going back from today, can you tell us, and maybe it goes 20 years because we're not privy to see what lands you took back from lessees on the revocable permits. Can you give a list or some information regarding any lands that you took back that the plans were for forestry, and what's happening with those lands today? So let's say, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the ranchers, I mean the cattle guys, because I'm kind of familiar with things that happened on my island. So as an example, I think Jason, the Monizes had to give up some lands. Probably, I can't think of the family name in Hamakua or Mauna Kea, and others that you already had taken the lands back. The plans were to go into forestry. And what's the condition as we see today? So if
Yeah, so I will ask my DLNR staff to chime in here, but the Jason Moniz situation was not a DLNR lease that we took back. It was required mitigation for the Daniel K. Inouye Highway, which the construction destroyed some forest, and so they had to protect forest in exchange. And so that was where that came from. That was not a deal anymore.
Okay, yeah, so any lands, well, whoever it is, that you did try and give it to us later, because we know it's gonna take time. So, and we got several more meetings, so. Anyway, I'm just curious, out of the 20 years, lands that you guys took back to do forestry, if any, during that 20-year period? And the condition, like if you guys planted trees, how many acres were planted? And give us an idea of the activity that forestry.
I'll check if there are any. Russell, did you want to
I
add?
just had a question, just to clarify it, to make sure we understand the question. Chair Inouye, you had mentioned RPs, and then so this, I took it, and then the first part of your question was about RPs, and we took back.
Yeah.
And I wanted to clarify, did you mean take back, and meaning forcefully and without
Yeah,
the,
well, yeah, not
meaning not the RP holder giving up the lands, because that happens quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
And
so you're
even
talking
if-
about,
Yeah, even if somebody gave you back lands that were in cattle, yeah? But you guys probably didn't have a plan for those lands, whether you're gonna auction it off or give it to DOFAR to plant trees, so.
Well, we will double
Yeah.
check and give you that information.
Yeah, and then who knows, maybe
if we did
there
that.
weren't any, so I'm just kind of curious.
We'll check, yes.
Yeah, if the lands are idle now, or if it was given out on another new lease. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions from other members of the working group? If not, then I have one question for Jason, if you're still on. Yeah, thank you. There you are, Jason. So what would be your desired outcome out of a negotiation with DLNR? If your lease were to stay with DLNR, what would be your desired outcome out of a new lease?
Basically what I said in the testimony, economically, we'd like to stay at net zero, yeah. So some of the early discussions with Bob, he had areas that we're not grazing right now that they might consider grazing. We have areas that we're grazing now that Jerry and I have looked at for years and have thought that, we really should try to get trees that have died while we were up there regrown, old trees that are just kind of hanging on, try to get those protected. We don't have dollars to do that, and so we'd hope we're hoping that DLNR would have some sort of program like we do with USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, where we have these cost share agreements, and they work out well. We've brought hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvements onto the lease, and so if DLNR has something similar, we'd like to look at it and work. Basically, the biggest threat is to see that the pastoral leases are totally taken out of pastoral use, like what Brandon's facing on Maui.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it would be useful for the working group to understand the process you're going through and your current negotiations, so that if it is a useful model, that we could understand it better and understand what the dynamics are. So I appreciate you sharing with us what you can. I understand you're still in discussions, and nothing's finalized yet. Yeah, thank you. Turning back to other working group members, any questions of our testifiers? They've been very kind and patient with us to give testimony once again after many sessions in a row, and you came back again. I really appreciate it, Lonnie. Thank you very much for spending your couple hours with us. Thank you to Alan and Nicole and Brian, Jason, Brendan, Peter for testifying. Are there any last questions or comments from members of the working group before we wrap up today's information meeting? I don't see anyone with a hand up. Chair Inouye, do you want to have any final statement before we wrap up?
Just thank everyone who participated in providing the testimonies. And, this is good discussions. And I'm sure there would have been a lot more for those that sent testimonies but didn't speak, for today. So our hearings are continual, so we'll work hard at it as well. Now, the question I had for you though, before we leave, when was the next meeting time?
So,
For close up.
I'll cover that next. Thank you.
Okay.
So for our next steps, there being no questions that I can see of working group members, the testifiers, I want to thank the testifiers. And now note for the working group that our next meeting will be held in about 2.5 weeks. It'll be on September 9th at 10 a.m. Also via Zoom. It'll also be a public meeting and we'll give opportunity for the public testimony at that time. What I'd like to do is to request all the working group members, if you want to compile your suggestions and send it to the co-chair and I, co-chair and me, about the list of some of the potential remedies that we've heard from lessees and from our own research, so that we can discuss this in our next meeting. The third meeting will consist of basically a discussion of working group members. What are the advantages and disadvantages of different remedies that we might offer? What can be changed to address some of these concerns? It'll be an open discussion of working group members at the next meeting. So please put that on your calendar, September 9th, 10 a.m. for our next public hearing of the Act 90 working group.
Can I question?
Yes, please.
It's kind of close, the September 9th. I have a big schedule on my plate because I also belong to other working groups. So we can start with your recommendation, but hopefully it can be a continued thing of what we can share.
Certainly. We have to adapt, certainly. We've got 3 more meetings of the group, of the working group.
Yeah, because my schedule is going to be real tight up until the 9th because it's only so almost less than 3 weeks. Yeah,
it's 2.5 weeks away. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Any last comments from you, Chair Bronco, or Vice? Okay. How about Deputy Director Atta or Chair Case? Any final comments before we wrap up our hearing today?
Then to add to that, Morris and Chair Case for DLNR, my request, if possible, if you can do that, report that I asked for be submitted for the September 9th meeting.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Thank you. Any final statement, Deputy Atta?
Well, just thanks you to the committee and the testifiers for providing the information that we got today. I think it's probably helpful to enhance our discussions to move this issue along, and really appreciate the opportunity to work with the working group and DLNR, and as well as the community to come up with something that's viable. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director.
Same here. Really appreciate it. Good discussion, good information, and important for working these through. Thank you.
Well, we thank you both of you too, but this is an issue. If it wasn't for the industry, we wouldn't be talking about it, but this issue is 30 years old. And I guess we all know I was the introducer, but I'm back. So now let's see what we can do with what's before us. So we appreciate both DLNR and DOA to stay in with us as well. Appreciate that. Okay.
Thank you, Co-Chair. There being no further business before this working group today, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for showing up.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everybody.